So far, my work on this channel has been primarily descriptive. I have described the situation in various regions of the planet and their issues with either low fertility or possibly also high immigration, causing various disturbances in the national life of different societies. Not that I would now want to stop making such videos altogether, but I would also like to make some videos dealing with the potential solutions. That is, of course, no small feat. Since if one is merely describing some situation, its causes and potential consequences, it is easier than figuring out the solutions. Describing that a bridge has collapsed, or a dam has burst, and that consequently a village might be flooded, or a new way to cross the river must be found, is most definitely less challenging than designing and constructing a new bridge or dam. So, this effort will definitely span across many videos. But before one really can get into trying to solve some issue, at least on the theoretical level, one has to understand and define the causes of the problem at hand. And I have realized that while I, of course, have talked about the reasons for the current low fertility crisis around the globe in numerous videos, I have yet to make a video dealing solely with that issue. So, in this video, I would like to provide a concise overview of what I perceive to be the fundamental reasons. That should make a bedrock of the following efforts to develop a solution. So, let's get to it. It is generally accepted that the spread of almost universal literacy, especially among women, was one of the crucial causes of the initial decline in fertility rates. I think we might often seriously underestimate the impact of spreading literacy on the history of humanity. It is almost certain that all of you watching my channel are literate, and it can be also presumed that you do not know many illiterate adults. I certainly do not. It is tough even to imagine a framework in which a person who does not know how to write and read is functioning. Reading, especially reading from an early age, modifies the development of brain capacities, expands consciousness, and opens up limitless new possibilities in the inner life of a person. It changes one's relationship with the world and creates a whole new personality. It is possible that something might also be lost with the capacity to read. Deep inner intuition based on a tradition that functions without the need to absorb written knowledge. But modernity, as we perceive it, is first and foremost conditioned by literacy. In large areas of the world, adult illiteracy was wiped out. It is no coincidence and a well-known fact that in those parts where literacy is nowhere close to universal levels, especially where there is a large gap between literacy levels of men and women, fertility still is very high. Niger, the country with the highest fertility rate on the planet, is also the country with the lowest literacy rate. Only 30% of women over the age of 15 in Niger are literate. With a few exceptions, every country followed a path of rising literacy rates preceding a fall in fertility rate by about 30 years on average. The process started in Protestant Europe in the 17th century and gradually spread throughout Europe and the world. When one looks at the map of countries by current fertility rate and female literacy rate, the correlation is undeniable. There is only one region that seems to defy this universal rule, and that is Central Asia, a peculiar region that, likely due to the communist rule under the Soviet Union, reached and maintained almost universal literacy of both sexes, while maintaining very solid and even increasing fertility in the post-Soviet period. This region certainly deserves an individual examination, which I will embark on in the future, but it is merely an exception to the rule. In Europe, the birthplace of universal literacy, it is a certain paradox that the strive for universal literacy was, first and foremost, motivated by religious efforts. Protestantism was based on the idea that every person should find their own way to God by studying the Bible. Well, to study the Bible without the intermediary of the clergy, one has to be able to read. And while literacy initially led to burning religious passions intensifying, it also kickstarted the processes that later led to the slow but inevitable decline of religious power, the so-called disenchantment of the world, through the ideas of the Enlightenment. Data on the recruitment of priests in France, the first country on the planet that experienced a rapid decline in fertility rates, suggests that it was precisely in the areas of France where the literacy rate was rising that the new recruitment of priests started to collapse. The decline in fertility in those areas followed not long after. Without relatively widespread literacy, none of the things we now perceive as the hallmarks of the modern world would be possible. The Industrial Revolution, modern science, and the technological progress connected to it, which, apart from other things, also led to the declining mortality rates, which are one of the central hallmarks of the demographic transition, would be unimaginable without the ability of a relevant portion of society to write and read, and thus accumulate knowledge through education. The mass political movements of the modern period are also mostly conditioned by the spread of ideas through printed word, as is the decline in universal religiousness. So, universal literacy can be understood as an absolute bedrock of the consequent development. As a general rule on a societal level, literate women who are, through reading, able to see beyond the horizon of their immediate surroundings do not want to spend their productive lives by having 6 or 7 children. This rule goes across ethnic, religious, or civilizational lines, and is thus more or less universal. That is one of the reasons for declining fertility that won't really help us that much when trying to find a solution. Once it happens, it cannot be rolled back unless a complete civilizational breakdown occurs. I do not think any of us would want to live in a society where a significant portion of the population cannot read or write, since it would inevitably be a very backward society regarding living standards and overall technological progress. We can apply the same criteria to other fundamental reasons for initial demographic decline, such as high infant mortality rates. Sure, societies with high infant mortality rates do have high birth rates. Still, pronatality cannot be the only value one does hold, since if it was, one could just urge his country or community to accept radical Islam, ultra-Orthodox Judaism, or to just turn into a pre-industrial, pre-modern, agrarian society. But that would be a case of throwing out the baby with the bathwater. We must try to find solutions that enable us to keep as many of the positive aspects of modernity as possible. When it comes to religion, the situation gets significantly more complex than with the literacy rate. It is also a well-established fact that most large world religions are inherently pronatalist, especially the Abrahamic monotheistic religions. Practicing religious people of various denominations do have a higher fertility rate than nominally religious people, as well as secular people. However, in the face of modernity, the previously mentioned universal literacy and large-scale urbanization that I will talk about later, the old religions are not able to keep their universal appeal. Many countries, even those that are still nominally rather religious, are holding on to their religiousness more as a marker of national identity, without significantly influencing their reproductive behavior. People often tend to say that Islam is able to keep its pronatalist values and resist secularization better than, for example, Christianity. And it likely is true to a certain extent. Still, when one controls for other variables, Muslim countries are on a similar trajectory as the rest of the world. Sure, Muslim countries indeed do, on average, have significantly higher fertility rates than the European or Anglo-Saxon, historically Christian countries. But one has to keep in mind that the mentioned countries all reached universal literacy and high urbanization rates, while many Muslim countries have not. When we look at such Muslim countries that combine high literacy rates and high urbanization rates, the fertility advantage begins to disappear. Turkey, Iran, Malaysia, Azerbaijan, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar are all at sub-replacement levels. Other countries like Tunisia, Indonesia, or Bangladesh seem to be hanging on the edge for now, but I presume that many Muslim countries that are urbanizing, while their populations are getting more literate and educated, will go under the replacement level in the near future. The truly pre-modern high birth rates are to be found in Muslim countries in sub-Saharan Africa, or countries like Pakistan or Afghanistan, where urbanization is very low and illiteracy very high. Countries like Syria, Egypt, and Iraq are in the process of their fertility declining quite rapidly, even though they will still demonstrate massive population growth in the near future due to the demographic momentum. Conversely, the majority Christian countries in Central Africa, for example, the Democratic Republic of Congo, have the same ultra-high fertility. Now, there likely are various levels of complexity. It is, for example, entirely possible that certain religions, for example Islam, are culturally less prone to providing women with education, and thus the processes leading to modernity and low fertility might be hindered. But in the face of modernity, represented by universal literacy and high urbanization, Islam is really not that different from Christianity from the demographic point of view. The fertility of immigrants from Muslim countries in Europe also converges with the general fertility levels across a couple of generations. Now, the children of immigrants from more religious backgrounds do converge notably slower than those from more secular backgrounds, and Islam seems to be potent in this regard, especially those versions of it that are connected to strong traditions of prearranged and cousin marriages, which are effective in slowing down the process of convergence. Now, some strains of religion can overcome the pitfalls of modernity, the so-called endogenous growth sects that combine pronatalism with segregation from the secular society. Old Order Anabaptists, certain denominations of Mormonism, Haredi Jews, Laestadian Lutherans, Salafi Islamists, and quiverful Protestants are examples of groups that are demographically thriving, while often surrounded by increasingly secular societies. Apart from high fertility, these groups' main strengths are relatively high retention rates. Most of the people born into these communities remain within them. The fertility advantage of practicing religious people is a well-known fact. But in most countries, it did not stop the rapid secularization due to the conversion, if one uses the religious vocabulary, of their offsprings to secularism. In a rapidly secularizing society, this seems very hard to avoid unless one secludes his children by very firm social taboos and provides secluded schooling and free time activities. Possibly life in completely secluded communities, as is the case with the Amish. Many people thus entertain the option of such sects retaining their exponential population growth and comprising a huge proportion of the future populations. But while their share inevitably will increase, I think there will be limits to their growth. One must keep in mind that these groups live within secular states with modern economies, and I think their success is, to a certain extent, dependent on this duality with the secular world. It is precisely the existence of the contrast between their highly religious and secluded lifestyle and the outside secular world that enables them to keep their inner coherence by defining themselves against the outside world. In the case of the Israeli Haredi Jews, their growing numbers seem to be already reaching the limits of tolerance of mainstream Israeli society. In the case of the North American sects, there is likely a relatively high growth potential due to the vast open plains and consequently low population density, and the ability of the Amish to successfully make a living as farmers and artisans. These groups will most likely play a larger role in the future demographics, but I doubt that the future will belong to them. However, religion is a crucial part of the equation. Now, religion is an absolutely integral part of the human condition. The need for a spiritual explanation of our existence and the perennial mysteries of life, death, and consciousness are here to stay. The inability of the current secular order to offer satisfying answers to these questions is one of the undisputable reasons for the coming demographic crash. But I would argue that the established world religions also show themselves unable to offer satisfying answers for modern humans. Recently, my real-life friend and fellow Czech YouTuber Magne Mirare made a great video about how the evolution of religions follows a relatively well-measurable path corresponding to the so-called energy capture, the amount of energy that society is able to capture per capita per day. The link for the video is in the description. Check it out. To somehow summarize it, even though with huge amount of simplicity, different civilizational levels on which societies operate create needs for different religious frameworks. Hunter and gatherer societies were able to capture around 5,000 kilocalories per capita per day, and their religions were usually some forms of animism. Bronze Age agricultural societies, formed around large rivers, reached a level of 15,000 kilocalories per capita per day, and were the birthplace of the great intellectual and religious traditions of the Axial Age. And after these agricultural societies gained even more prosperity throughout the centuries, reaching approximately 20,000 kilocalories per capita per day, this relative prosperity, which was inevitably accompanied by growing income inequality and a plethora of other phenomena, spawned Christianity and later also Islam, new, highly moralistic faiths corresponding to the needs of the times. But in the 20th century, developed societies reached the level of energy capture of 230,000 kilocalories per capita per day, more than 10 times higher than at the time of the creation of Christianity. We need new forms of religions that would be able to syncretize the level of accumulated contradictions between the traditions of religious thought created for the needs of completely different societies thousands of years ago and the emptiness of modernity. That is by no means means meant to say that any of the old religions are wrong or should be thrown out of the window, since if one is having a happy and fulfilled life being Christian, Muslim, Hindu, or anything else, that is great, and he is in no need of reinventing anything. Any new religious traditions would inevitably continue to build on the wisdom of the older faiths. But I feel that for the billions of modern, secular, urbanized people, some sort of new exile age, whether in the form of the metamorphosis of the old religions or the creation of new ones, is an indispensable precondition of a demographic renaissance. Not that I would have any idea of how to go about that. Now is the time to introduce the sponsor of today's video, the one and only VPN provider Private Internet Access. I assume that most of my viewers spend a lot of time online. A virtual private network, or VPN for short, is an app that hides your IP address and safeguards your internet connection through an encrypted tunnel. This way, it shields your digital life from the eyes of those that are looking to exploit your private information. Using the internet without private internet access is like having a microphone in your car. Everyone can hear your guilty pleasure playlist. Private internet access is the world's most transparent VPN provider, with over 30 million downloads. They will never record or store user data, and their no-logs policy has been proven multiple times in court and by a third-party audit from Deloitte. Many websites and services across the internet are only accessible depending on your physical location. Streaming services such as Netflix have different library options based on where you are located, and some shows or movies cannot be accessed if you are not located in the region. For example, the Lord of the Rings trilogy is not on the Czech Netflix, but it is on Swiss or Italian Netflix. Private internet access allows you to access to region-restricted content from all over the world, and I can thus enjoy The Lord of the Rings, one of my favorite movies ever. That is just one of the reasons why I cannot recommend private internet access enough. Private internet access is available for all platforms: Windows, Mac OS, Android, Linux, iOS, and many more. And you can use one private internet access subscription to protect an unlimited amount of devices at the same time. So, go to piavpn.com/Kaiserbauch to grab an 83% discount on private internet access. That's just $2.03 a month, and you will also get 4 extra months completely for free. Check it out, guys, it really is worth it. One of the most fundamental demographic realities is that urban fertility rates are lower than rural fertility rates. This truth holds across all religious or ethnic groups and is thus universal. The map of countries by urbanization rates significantly correlates with the map of fertility rates. When you examine the situation within countries, you can almost always find that the urban regions have lower fertility than the rural ones. That is true in highly developed countries like Germany, Japan, and the United States, as well as in developing countries like Bangladesh, Nigeria, and Nicaragua. As with every rule, there are some exceptions, but otherwise it is a universal truth. Now, there are a multitude of reasons for this reality. People living in cities are, on average, significantly more educated. People with university education are inevitably concentrated in the cities, where universities and the jobs are concentrated as well. Women with university education have the least children, since they spend a significant proportion of their fertile years in education. After they finish, they usually want to put their education to use by working in their field of study. People in the cities are also more secular and liberal, and much less likely to live near their extended family, which could help them with childcare. Cities were always the birthplaces of new, subversive revolutionary ideas, the meeting places of people from various backgrounds and cultures, which can then synergize to create new forms, something that definitely contributed a lot to human progress on all possible levels, but which also tears down the veil of belief in one's own values and traditions as the undeniably right and true ones. On some fundamental level, even though cities are usually connected with individualism, cities are inherently collectivist. To run a huge city, you just need a significant level of collective governmental effort, since without a large plethora of highly organized public services, such as public transport, sewage management, waste disposal, policing or healthcare, cities would be unlivable. But this collectivism does not take on the form of a tight-knit, well-known community as in the rural areas, but an impersonal, anonymized character. People in cities are detached from the impacts of low fertility and depopulation, since young people are moving to cities all the time, while a farmer living in a rural area is directly impacted by not having children or his children leaving the area, presumably for the city, since he then won't have anyone to run his farm after him, and he just needs to sell it or let it decay. This sense of direct impacts of one's reproductive behavior on his surroundings is missing in the cities. While one might understand the issue of population decline and aging on a rational level, it is significantly harder to truly perceive the issue in its seriousness when one lives in a large city, surrounded by seemingly inexhaustible numbers of people. It is just an incredibly complex whirlwind of factors that influence each other, and it is hard to precisely determine what is the root cause of what. However, a crucial factor seems to be the density of urbanization and the housing size. The average size of dwellings is logically larger in rural areas, where people mostly live in single-family houses and not in apartments. When you look at the entities with the lowest fertility on the planet, in all the cases you will find that those are East Asian cities: Macau, Seoul, Hong Kong, Shanghai, Tokyo, and such. We thus have a pretty good model for what is the worst possible environment for fertility in developed world. Now, it is not the only factor. There are specific cultural East Asian forces in play as well. But one does not have to be exactly a demographer nor an urban planner to figure out that people living in places looking like this or this won't be exactly churning out 4 children per woman. So, the question seems to be whether there is a correlation between more living space, bigger houses, and higher fertility. In short, probably yes. I was looking at the counties in Sweden with the highest fertility rate. They were counties with low population density and thus not really urban. People mostly live in autonomous houses. At the same time, those counties are located in southern Sweden. And my Swedish friend David, who helped me a lot with my Swedish video and who actually lives in one of these counties, testified to me that many of the people living in these counties are very often people who work in the cities or are connected to the metropolitan knowledge economy in some way. Basically, while these regions are probably counted as rural within the rural-urban dichotomy, the people there are not really your typical villagers. More like something between suburbs and rural areas, sociologically. Another study I have found confirmed that suburbs have higher fertility rates in all European Nordic countries. A separate study from Finland confirmed that fertility is higher among people living in single-family houses, lower in semi-detached houses, and lowest in apartments. The difference is primarily caused by the much bigger chance of people in single-family houses for having a third or fourth child. I saw another dataset from Australia's greatest metropolitan areas, and the fertility difference between the inner-city neighborhoods of cities like Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane, and the outer rings of suburban neighborhoods was massive. Often, the fertility rate was 50 to 100% larger in the suburban regions. I have also checked the data on the city districts in Prague and Brno, the 2 largest cities in the Czech Republic, with the youngest age structures, and they were overwhelmingly outskirted districts with a much higher prevalence of single-family houses than is the average. Now, I have also found another study that contradicts the findings of the previous one regarding the Nordic countries. This new study claimed that while in Eastern and Southern Europe, suburbs have higher fertility than cities, in Western, Central and Northern Europe, they do not. Nevertheless, after scratching my head for a while, I have found that there is some correlation between those countries where a higher proportion of the housing stock in the cities is composed of houses rather than apartments. For example, the United Kingdom, France, Denmark, Netherlands or Belgium. The influence of suburbs on fertility is lower than in countries where the cities are more composed of apartments, such as Southern and Eastern Europe. I have not found any precise data on the prevalence of apartments on a city level, only on a country level, which skews the results since the urbanization rate influences it massively. For example, while in Romania, Hungary, Slovakia or Slovenia, there is a relatively low proportion of people living in apartments that is caused to a large extent by their lower urbanization rate, meaning that a large part of the population lives in villages, overwhelmingly in houses. However, if one looks at the housing stock of the largest cities in those countries, Bucharest, Bratislava or Ljubljana, I suppose one would find that they have significantly fewer houses than cities in northwestern Europe. Thus, the impact of suburbs on the fertility in the cities is higher. Now, the issue is complex. In some countries, for example the aforementioned Sweden, the high fertility rural countries overlap with the Swedish Protestant Bible Belt, an area where practicing religious people are concentrated. When it comes to higher suburban fertility, there is a factor of wealth, meaning that the people who can afford to live in the pricey suburban areas and buy or rent a house can also afford to have more children. Yet another factor might be that people wanting to have children are more inclined to move to some suburban areas, while people not wanting them are more prone to staying in the city centers. But a well-made sociological study should control for these variables. However, on some fundamental level, one intuitively feels that the issue of housing size is crucial to the question of fertility. Now, I'm by no means an expert in this stuff, so feel free to call me out on any nonsense that I might be saying. But it seems to me that the whole urban planning crowd pretty much hates the allegedly soulless, sprawling American suburbia, and, on the other hand, seems to adore the well-thought-out density of the multifunctional urban zones combining residential, commercial and recreational areas in cities like Tokyo or in Europe. And from the point of view of running a city efficiently, which is their job, they are most likely absolutely correct. But from the point of view of supporting birth rates, not so much. When you distill this to the basics, if someone lives in a 3-room apartment with 80 square meters, the most common housing size in the Czech Republic, the chance of him having more than 2 children, even if he lives in a neatly designed neighborhood and all the amenities like doctor, school or a workplace are within 15 minutes reach, is just much lower than in someone lives in a 4-room single-family house with 200 square meters and a large garden in the sprawling suburbs of Austin, Texas, even if he has to drive for 30 minutes to buy some toilet paper. But with all this said, cities are absolutely crucial and indispensable for modern civilization. The absolute triumph of the cities is one of the hallmarks of the whole modern period. While people often tend to idealize rural life, its conservatism and purity, not many of them actually live by their word, buy a cheap large house in some depopulating village and raise a massive family there. Why not? Well, because there is not much to do there, is it? The purity and innocence of rural life mostly do not exist anymore. The socio-economic reason for the existence of the countryside and the heart of community countryside life lies in agriculture. However, due to modern technologies being applied in agriculture, a tiny percentage of the population in most somewhat developed countries works in agriculture. It is no coincidence that the map of countries by the percentage of the population working in agriculture also strongly correlates with the map of fertility rates. When the heart of a country's economic activity starts moving from agriculture to industry, and even more so to a service-based economy, cities became by far the most efficient way of organizing society. They are like a silver bullet of human capital. There are some additional economic sectors supporting rural areas, mostly various forms of extraction of natural resources. But apart from that, some kind of massive de-urbanization is hard to imagine in other scenario than a collapse of a modern society. So, it seems that we need to somehow combine the economic vibrancy of city life with the spaciousness of the rural or semi-rural areas. Which does seem like an oxymoron and squaring the circle. The American-style suburbs are an attempt to do precisely that. But if they are as bad as people claim, we should probably figure something else out. Once again, not that I would know precisely what. The last fundamental I would like to outline in this video is the role men and women should have within society. Now, in my videos, I often talk about the modern aggressive Western feminism, which often truly is blatantly antinatalist. If I hear a woman talk about how motherhood is one of the hallmarks of the patriarchy and that family thus needs to be dismantled for women to reach final liberation, something that is not uncommon among many contemporary feminists, it is hard not to react highly dismissively. However, it is also necessary to acknowledge some basic facts. The reorientation of modern economies from generally highly demanding manual labor, whether in agriculture or early industries, to less physically challenging, more mechanized industries, and especially to service-based economy, dismantled the elementary barriers to female engagement on the labor market. The road to the current state of things began when women reached the same literacy levels as men, hundreds of years ago. There were many different hallmarks in the development of this process, such as the female factory workers during world wars, or the automation of household work through various household appliances, which created a feeling of emptiness among the isolated suburban housewives. But it all led to the fundamental reality that in your average corporate office job, women are, on average, not any less capable than men to successfully hold such a job. That is just a fact. The idea that women can pursue the same academic and career paths as men and are thus no less capable or intellectually endowed is understandably empowering to women. Women now comprise the majority of college enrollments not only in the Western world, but also in many countries in the Muslim world or some Southeast Asian nations. But it also creates a huge demographic imbalance. Quite logically, a woman who spends a significant part of her fertile years in education and subsequent work has much less time to start a family. If she manages to do so, she will likely have fewer children. The great documentary Birth Gap by Stephen J. Shaw illustrates two critical phenomena. Firstly, fertility decline to subreplacement levels throughout the developed world is pushed first and foremost by the rise of childlessness. Among people who do have families, the average family size did not change all that dramatically. And the rise of childlessness is, among other things, caused by a huge amount of people who did not intend not to have children, but they just sort of always waited for the right time until it was too late. Often because of academic and career reasons. People do have unrealistic expectations about the success of starting a family at a higher age. There are also all the other well-known impacts, such as the fact that women are naturally attracted to men who stand higher in the social hierarchy, having at least the same, but ideally higher levels of education and income. But since single childless women throughout many Western countries are more educated and often do have higher incomes than men, there quite logically cannot be enough men that would rise to those expectations. That is all intertwined with the growing ideological gap between the genders, observable among the youth in many developed countries, that further hinders family formation. There are a million other phenomena connected to this imbalance. Still, the central point is this. Women's aspiration for other achievements in life besides motherhood has to be acknowledged as legitimate. To pretend we can just go back in time and behave as if the last 100 years of development never happened is illusory. The Pandora's box has been opened. To say to women that they just need to forget all their dreams and aspirations for inner fulfillment other than family and household will inevitably just breed the same justified resentment as telling young, clueless guys that they are dangerous, privileged sexists. But it also needs to be acknowledged that there is a question of the basic reproductive survival of a society that is of a higher magnitude than any individual rights and aspirations, and that women do play an absolutely indispensable role that is just biologically given. Currently, these two elements seem to contradict each other, creating a plethora of issues. They need to be syncretized. Once again, I do not have the answers, but I'm trying to ask the right questions. So, that's it. I am sure many people in the comments will think this list is incomplete, and I could go on forever listing other and other reasons. Family systems, historical position of women in different societies, marriage rates, house prices, economic factors, and so on. But I wanted to distill it to the basics that are pretty much universal, or at least close to it.